Knuckleheadism. I had a business in the 90s, early 90s. I had just went through some horrific times with my marriage. I was still with my first wife. Beautiful woman. Gave me 2 kids. One of them's going to be a PhD soon. So yeah. That was some great times. Those are the best of times, the worst of times, all that BS. But that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is I had a business. And what I did was, during the summer, the growers were growing cotton. And I had, 40, 50 fields that were half miles. And I would have to go through each one of those fields once a month and walk from one section, from the northwest section to the southeast section, and pull samples all the way through. That would be something I had to do. And also, I have to sweep the fields and count the bugs of certain bugs, like the lygus bug, mites, so forth. Check the fields, okay. And then I'd also have to count the bolls on the top 5 and the bottom 5. So obviously at the beginning of the year, all you have to do is count the top 5. And the farmers would use this information with data that I would punch in at night to analyze what type of growth regulators, what kind of pesticide, that, so forth. That's what we did during the growing season. And we'd also take samples, I think 4 times a year. Not 4 times a year, but I think a couple of times a season. Boll counts. We'd count all the bolls to project how much cotton would grow. I'd do things like that, right? And I gave myself a title of Chief Knucklehead for that business, Danes and Sons Ags. And what I meant by that was that if I had so much work to do during that week, I would persist and persist till it was done. And this is a very important thing in life. It's very important. But you don't want to wind up like the bulldogs like the bloodhounds that chased Cool Hand Luke in the famous movie Cool Hand Luke, where they chased Cool Hand Luke so far till they died. That would be bad knuckleheadism. For instance, I did this kind of behavior the first decade of this century. I lifted so much weight that I gave myself a hernia. I gave myself a hernia from lifting so much. And I kept persisting, and I was still lifting after I had the hernia. That's a true story. So that's a case where if you're going to be dumb, you're going to be tough, and I was just way too tough. Now, I want to talk about a couple of things. I have learned not to be a knucklehead anymore. I have learned. I'm going to give you an example. I was a zoner. I started getting on the zone diet in 1995. It was the 30-30-40 plan, 30% protein, 30% fat, 30% carbohydrate, and this is supposed to be the greatest thing in the world. Make you eat certain fats, certain things, and it's supposed to make you healthy as hell and keep you skinny. And it come out by this guy named Barry Sears, and I was on it. And I had thought that I was still a little bit too heavy, and I didn't like certain things, but it was healthy. I bought the fish oil and so forth. And I stuck with it for years. Okay, so in 2009, so this is 14 years later. I'd been on this diet essentially for 14 years. I'd fallen, but I had bought his fish oil for years and was buying other brands, but mostly his fish oil. For many years, I was on auto ship. So all of a sudden, my son, Alexander, my oldest son, the one I'm estranged from, I haven't talked to him in over 2 years. So he would definitely be a knucklehead, by the way. Anyway, he tells me all about this fathead and how I need to watch fathead and how it's a great diet, low-carb diet. And I thought, low-carb diet, that's just the craziest thing. Atkins, all that, so forth and so on. And I was violently opposed to it for years. But I watched it. And then I went out a couple of weeks later and bought Gary Taub's book, Why We Get Fat. And I read the book, and he explained, and it took him 140 or 150 pages to get to what the diet was, which was simply eat less than 50 carbs a day. You know, eat your protein, eat your fat, but keep your lower carbs. And I followed that. And I went from 227 pounds to 190. And I have pretty much followed that since that time. Now I eat carbohydrates because I just, if I want to get really lean, I can. But I know how to do it. So I've learned how to do this. Now, I have some relatives that I've tried to explain this to, and they keep saying that they need to exercise more, or they're not. That has nothing to do with it. I don't say it's nothing. It has something to do with it. But if you were fairly lean as a young person, when you were 21, you were fairly lean. When you were 18, you were fairly lean. You have the genetics to be lean. So you don't need to do anything extra. You don't have to run 7 or 8 miles. I have a relative that works out 4 or 5 hours a day. And when you go visit him, he's a complete knucklehead. Okay, that's knuckleheadism, because you don't have to do it. Okay, for me, like, I'm 6 feet tall. I weigh 200 pounds. I don't need to do anything. I have a relative that's 6'5". I have a nephew that's 6'5". I have a nephew that's 6'5". I have uncles on both sides of the family that were just tremendously strong physical specimens. So I don't really think that I need to do a whole lot. I don't. I think I just need to maintain what I'm doing and push it a little bit to get some more. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to hurt my shoulder. My shoulder was hurting. That's what did this. I am a knucklehead. I will keep going through things when it's no good. This is a good program that's in us to make us accomplish things, but it's also a trap. It also messes it up. We've got to look at these things and try to evaluate these things in ourselves. Okay, that's what we need to do. And that was just his little talk. Hopefully you find it beneficial. So number one, it's good to be persistent, but it can have its detriments. And you have to be careful and evaluate these things. Out!